Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maura Riley, and I'm the director of the Zimmerli Art Museum. And I'm delighted to be here today and to introduce Dr. Amanda Cachia. As the author of a book titled Curatorial Activism, I've been following Amanda's work for over a decade. She has created, in my opinion, the most important exhibitions to date that focus on artists with disabilities. So it was an honor when she agreed to my invitation to organize an exhibition at the Zimmerli Art Museum on the subject, which is still currently on view through December 20th. It's called Smoke and Mirrors. And the impetus behind Smoke and Mirrors came from a disability roundtable that the Zimmerli organized in 2022, wherein we asked the community to advise us on how best to meet their access needs. And in addition to suggestions like Braille and ASL and closed captioning, the most profound takeaway from the roundtable was that the community wanted to see themselves represented on the museum's walls. So Smoke and Mirrors is a direct result of that advice. Today, we have the privilege of hearing Amanda speak about her new book. But before doing so, allow me to share with you her distinguished biographies. Let me pull that up. So Dr. Cachia has an established career profile as a curator, consultant, writer, and art historian who specializes in disability arts activism across intersectional axes of difference, including gender, race, and sexuality. Amanda's the assistant professor and assistant director of the Masters of Arts in Arts Leadership graduate program at the Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts at the University of Houston. She's the author of The Agency of Access, Contemporary Disability Art and Institutional Critique, about which she will speak momentarily, and the editor of Curating Access, Disability Art Activism and Creative Accommodation. Amanda is the 2024 recipient of the $50,000 National Arts and Disability Award issued by Creative Australia. And she's also a 2023 grantee of the Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant to support the publication of her next monograph, which is titled Hospital Aesthetics, Disability Medicine Activism, which is forthcoming from Manchester University Press next year. Now, following the talk, Nicole Simpson, the museum's associate curator, and the in-house curator who worked directly with Amanda to realize the exhibition Smoke and Mirrors, will lead the Q&A. So please put questions into the chats for that particular segment of today's program. Now, without further ado, I will turn over the program to Amanda. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Maura, for that very kind and generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, so before I begin my presentation today, I'm going to be speaking for around about 50 minutes or so, and I'm going to time myself, but the very kind Zimmerli Art Museum staff are going to keep watch of me. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a self-description. So I'm a woman of short stature. I'm 4'3" tall. I'm currently sitting in my home office. I have many rows of books behind me, a small lamp and a picture. I have brown curly hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing red framed glasses, and I have a blue sweater on and a gold love heart locket necklace on today. And I just want to give thanks to, I already thanked Maura, but I really can't thank Maura enough for all of her incredible support, for inviting me into this magnificent museum to curate this exhibition, which has been really one of the highlights of my curatorial career. I've organized many shows for the last 20 years in my practice, but it's the last 10 years that my practice as a curator has been exclusively focused on disability arts and disability arts activism. And so certainly this is one of the most significant shows that I've organized here in the United States. So I've organized others in other places as well, in Canada, specifically in Australia, where I'm from. But this show here in the US has been such a highlight for me. So I want to thank Maura and all the incredible staff, Brandon, Nicole, Teresa, everyone there that has been so supportive of the exhibition, and now, of course, my book. And so I'm so excited to share my book with you, being released today into the world. It's really such a thrill. Here's the hardcover that I'm holding up in front of me. That I know the hardcover is kind of retailing for I think around $100 or $90. And then the soft cover and the ebook are retailing for 20. I note that my editor is in the room at the moment, so I want to warmly thank Sean Vigil, who has been my editor at Temple University Press, who has been so wonderful to work with and so generous and supportive to really steer the book through to its completion. And it's a really fine product, fine result that I'm so happy with. The images, the quality of the color images, and all of the images in the book look terrific. So I really want to thank him so much for all of that. So the presentation today, I'm going to walk you through the argument of the book and show you the different chapters and some examples of artwork in each of the chapters. I think given that the book there's so many different artwork examples, it's not going to be possible to cover everything in the book. But I'll certainly do my best, and we'll probably end up skimming over, some works here and there, but it would at least give you a good overview. And we do have time at the end for Q&A, but if anyone has any questions prior to waiting for the end of the discussion, the presentation, please just interrupt and put your questions in the chat. That's really fine as well. I also want to do an access check and ask if there's anyone in attendance today that would like me to provide image descriptions. If you could put that in the chat so I'm aware of if that is something that is needed by anybody, I'm happy to provide image descriptions. So please do let me know. There's lots of images that I'll be sharing in the next 50 minutes or so. Okay, so far I can't see anyone asking for that request, but one person indicated yes. Okay, fantastic. Okay, good. The other thing I should say is that, excuse me, hold on a second. Okay, everybody. So that was what I was going to say, that I have a cold. So there may be moments of momentary pause. So I apologize for that. So let's embrace crep time as part of my cold, that there may be moments of pause while I have a sip of water or I have a cough or something like that. So please bear with me as I'm dealing with change of weather situation here in Houston. So, okay, let me start here. Okay, so this is my website. I encourage you to explore my website, which is quite a good resource for all the shows that I've curated, all my writing, all my teaching, etc. And what we're looking at on the screen here is simply a screenshot of the homepage of my website. And it has headings along the top that say writing, curating, resources, services, teaching, bio, and blog, which is not actually activated. And there's like a series of images of book covers, artworks that I've been involved in as a curator, catalogs for shows that I've curated over the years, etc. Along the right-hand side is a listing of news and upcoming, which is all of the current events that I've been involved in, conferences, exhibitions, publishing, etc. And then on the left-hand side of the screen is a current headshot of me. And I'm wearing a colorful dress with a patterns of red and black and yellow, etc. So let's go to the next screen here. This is just to say that I'm also an editor of a book called Curating Access, Disability Art Activism and Creative Accommodation. This book came out a couple of years ago and includes over 40 contributors from around the world who have basically they're all scholars or artists or curators. There lots of them are beyond just being scholars, they're practitioners in the field. And I really wanted to develop this book first because it was important for me to share with community how there's been so many people that have been influenced by this concept of creative access. That's a really important term for this volume, but also for my new book that just came out, The Agency of Access, because the idea is that artists, disabled artists, are using the tools or the materials of access as a way to express their activism. And they're doing that as a way to express their agency. And so I wanted the world to kind of see what good work is being done. And I kind of prioritized the edited volume over my monograph. So I really wanted, again, to like be in community and be in dialogue with all of these terrific people who are doing this work. So the image description, there's an image on the left is the cover of the edited volume, and it has the title, Curating Access. And it's like a kind of like an abstract swirly pattern of colors, yellow, this is like sort of orange, red, purple, blues. It's very beautiful. And then on the right-hand side, there's a text that says released in September of 2022. And there's like a grid of 4 smaller thumbnail images, which are all images taken out of different chapters of the book. One of them includes William Pope L, who's in a performance work where he is crawling along the ground and he's wearing a blindfold. And then there's an image of a person who's laying on a white sheets on a bed. That she's just wearing a pair of blue underwear and has roses kind of crossing over her chest, and her arms are kind of crossed over her chest. And then there's another image of people who are using their canes to explore a public space. And the final image is like a wheelchair, but it looks like it's in a gallery space, but it looks like it's being crushed by sort of like these different kind of column-like structures that kind of resting on top of it. So the next slide is my book cover. It's the back and the front. And the cover of the book has an artwork by an Irish artist named Corbin Walker. And this is, one of my, I decided really to put Corbin's fantastic work on the cover of the book because he really is one of the first disabled artists that I met in 2005. And I met him at a Little People of America convention in, trying to remember which city it was in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. And he was also interesting to me because he was making work about disability that wasn't figurative, and that it was agential, but it wasn't about the body. He was making work in a minimalist style, and he was making work in an abstract style. And I was very curious, like, how do you represent the body in a way, the disabled body in a way that is beyond the figurative? So what we're looking at is on the cover is an installation of, it's called Short Minute Matter. And it's a series of stanchions, and they are all kind of sort of tied together or connected together with a wire. And it looks like it's almost like a labyrinth-like space. And the idea is for visitors to have to walk through this space and try and work out how to get from one end to the other. It's kind of like a maze. And Corbin did this in a way that was very, uh, he was trying to be antagonistic to his audience because he told me in several interviews that when he goes to art museums throughout Europe, and I have a similar experience to him, given I'm also a person of short stature like Corbin. We're both 4'3" tall. Is that when you go to a museum, they use these stanchions to um, inhibit you from touching them, right? To block you from touching the work. It's prohibited for conservation reasons, security reasons, etc. But yet, because we're shorter, it really interferes greatly with the experience of viewing the work, right? Because the stanchions come up higher on our bodies. And so I guess this is a way of Corbin trying to address that frustration by turning the tables, like flipping the tables onto the viewer and saying, now we want you as the average height viewer to experience that frustration and almost get tangled up in this web of lines and stanchions. So I really enjoy that aspect of the work, and that this is kind of one of the main overarching themes of my book, that there's this tension between an antagonistic approach to audiences by contemporary disabled artists, but on the other hand, they also want to educate, in some ways. They want you as the average height viewer or as the non-disabled viewer to be in communication with, or to just be with a disabled body, to experience what it is like to be with that disabled person. And so what you're looking at on the screen is also the back cover of the book. And so there are blurbs written by two fantastic people. The first person is Carrie Sandell, who is the director of the program on disability art and humanities at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I've known Carrie for many, many years, and so grateful that she was able to write such a nice text about my work. And then the other scholar is Aruna D'Souza, who's a very well established art critic, curator, author. She's published several books, the most recent being Imperfect Solidarities. And she's provided a nice blurb about the book as well. And then the image also includes my headshot and a description of my role as an assistant professor of arts leadership at the University of Houston. All right, so this is the overarching argument of the book. I'll read out this text, and I promise I won't read out too many more texts here, but this is kind of the crux of the book here. So it's the agency of access argues that contemporary disabled artists are moving away from representations of disability and instead creating an art of access, or access aesthetics, through artworks that center translation, sensory expansion, touch, and movement for audiences that offer an experience of being with disability. By making inequities in the museum more transparent, artists are also engaging in institutional critique, demanding agency, voice, empowerment, and social justice. And on a broader level, this book also shows how disability art extends and repurposes the artistic past differently. Okay, so that is the overarching argument. We'll go to the next slide. So this slide is really providing bullet points on, again, giving us a definition of access aesthetics or creative access, which I already mentioned. I'm happy to read out some of this text again, just to make sure that we really understand this term, because it is so important. So it's a genre and an art movement that centers access as a medium that contemporary disabled artists use as a political strategy. Access is the subject matter in concert with being the guiding principle for the design of exhibitions that offer new registers for exhibition spectatorship. Access aesthetics is relational, collective, and intersectional, and it intends to rearrange structures of power. and it works in tandem with disability justice and institutional critique. And then I also wanted to talk about institutional critique. And I noticed George is in attendance today, and I'm so happy about that because George is one of these curators that will always be one of my biggest influences because of Fred Wilson's Minding the Museum project that George is really responsible for. And I talk about in my book as well. So, institutional critique, just very broadly, for those of you who might not be familiar, is the act of critiquing an institution as artistic practice. And the institution meaning the museum or the art gallery. And so on the screen here, there's two images. There's one on the left, which is a black and white photograph of Fred Wilson, who's standing before one of the works or dollhouse piece in the museum at the Maryland Historical Society. And on the right is another installation shot of a whipping post and chairs that are all kind of assembled in front of this whipping post inside of a gallery with there's red painted walls in the background. So this was like one of the examples of an institutional critique that I always turn to that George, as I mentioned, organized back in 1992, 1993. And I always teach this project to my students as well, because what happened is that Fred Wilson, as a black man, a black artist, had come into the museum. And George, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you could probably describe this so much better than I can. But George had invited him to come in and rearrange the display and kind of curate from the collection of the Maryland Historical Society so that basically, from his own interpretation and his own point of view, gave a very different insight into the collecting practices of the Historical Society, which were ultimately, because it was a kind of colonialist institution, it ended up being quite racist collecting practices. And so Fred Wilson came in and really shone a light on that. And through these really startling installations, such as the one that I just described, which is the whipping post and these series of chairs. So I really spent time kind of laying out the parameters of institutional critiquing, saying, here's an example of how somebody with intersectional identity, like Fred Wilson, thinking about race, came into an organization to critique it and to say that this is what disabled artists are doing as well in their practice. They're coming in and critiquing the institution in the way that Fred Wilson did. And this is Finnegan Shannon, who I also kind of draw on quite a bit to say that I feel as though Finnegan's work is really quite like an archetype of institutional critique for disability because, well, they just do it so well. What we're looking at here is work that for which they've become so well known is these benches that they work with furniture fabricators and create these benches. And then they're painted in the ADA blue color, meaning the signage that you see with the wheelchair symbol, the same color. And then they, in uppercase letters, create, different types of splash these signs across them very loudly for us to see. This one here says, "This exhibition has asked me to stand for too long. Sit if you agree." A critique of simply that there aren't enough benches, there aren't in museums, there aren't enough places to sit, there aren't enough places to rest and relax. And for Finnegan, who was somebody that has a disability since being a young person, it's really tiring and exhausting going through museums where there isn't that kind of simple, I call it a simple gesture because, as Finnegan calls it, quite a solvable problem that museums could easily create and offer more benches for us, but that yet it still remains something that's quite sparse, right? I'm sure we can all relate to that. So the text on the right says that, like Fred Wilson, contemporary disabled artists also work to unveil limited perspectives of museum culture, steeped in patriarchal, racist, and ableist frameworks. So these are kind of just laying out the basics for you in this book, okay? And then I just wanted to add here that there are other art historical precedents that I rely on and draw from. in the book, and that includes surrealism, conceptual art, minimalism, fluxus, body art, performance art, and 20th century exhibition designers like Herbert Bayer and Friedrich Kiesler. Friedrich Kiesler, not so much actually, but in my introduction, you'll see Herbert Bayer is listed along with this image on the left. Excuse me, it's called Extended Vision. It's from 1929. It's an illustration, and what we have is a man wearing a black suit, and his head is a giant eyeball, and it's a profile perspective. And so, kind of stemming out of the eyeball is these kind of lines that are meant to kind of illustrate the eyeball's vision going up and down the wall of a space. And there's like all of these series of rectangles that have been like basically that they go up and down the wall. And this is what the eyeball is looking at. And what it's demonstrating is that Herbert Bayer was really interested as a designer, as an exhibition designer, in the 1920s and 1930s when he was practicing, was how we need to look beyond like just our straightforward mode of spectatorship, which is simply looking at a work in one position, standing at average height on that wall without any other accommodation in mind. So wanted to challenge that essentially. He was saying, why not have work hung up higher to make to look up, or work that is hung lower to the ground? Why do we need to limit ourselves by this very one singular way of seeing? And so I really liked that. And I kind of sort of suggest in the book that there are precedents in art history and exhibition design for looking beyond, ways of looking beyond the normative, right? So even though, I mean, my book is all about multisensoriality, but so even though Herbert Bayer was still kind of vision centric, essentially, with this design, I still feel as though he's definitely urging us as spectators and audience members to look beyond, to sort of look beyond this sort of standard way of just like this one kind of vertical positionality in a museum space. Okay. And so the image on the right is a piece by Yoko Ono, who was kind of loosely associated with Fluxus, and it's called Bandaged Orchestra. It was a performance piece that was occurred at the Carnegie Recital Hall in 1965. It's a black and white photograph of all of these men who are like completely bandaged up like mummies. Some of them are wearing glasses, kind of is almost comical with the way that the bandages are going over their faces. And this idea of like what does it mean to be an orchestra without sound, or without instruments? What kinds of other kinds of sounds might be produced, or other kinds of experiments might be produced by the body or by the experience of an orchestra. So again, I was kind of sort of suggesting here, like there are other precedents in art history, like particularly through Fluxus, like these suggestions of multisensoriality. All right, let's move on. The disability art theory that I draw from in the book is wide ranging, and this screen has a series of different scholars and different authors that I'm interested in, and I'll read them out for you. Crip Theory by Robert McClure, Disability Theory by Tobin Sievers, The Matter of Disability, Materiality, Biopolitics, Crip Affect, by David Mitchell, Susan Antibes, and Sharon Snyder. Mia Mingus is an image of a woman, an Asian woman with long hair and wearing glasses. She's wearing a denim shirt, and she's sitting on a chair in the middle of a garden. There's a beautiful leafy background and ferns and flowers in the background. This is Thomas Abrams, a white man who's wearing a jacket and jeans, and he's also sitting in a garden. So Mia Mingus, I really was informed by her in terms of thinking about access, intimacy, and Thomas Abrams was informed my thinking around phenomenology and how to specifically link phenomenology with disability. That's so important. And then, of course, Sarah Ahmed, who I've admired for many, many years, who wrote a terrific book called Queer Phenomenology, Orientations, Objects, Others, and found her to be a great touchstone, but felt that I really like Thomas Abrams' work because it extends Sarah Ahmed's work into a conversation around disability. Okay, so moving along here, this slide simply just says what the chapters of the book are. So it's 5 chapters. The first chapter is called Translation. The second is called Sensory Aesthetics. The third is called Movement. The fourth is called Please Touch. And the fifth is Exhibition Design. And so I'm just always keeping my eye on the time here. So as I said, now we're going to see a lot of images, and I'm just going to try and show you at least 1 or 2 images from each chapter, and explain kind of the premise of each chapter. So this is a work by Carmen Papalia. So the premise of translation, I'll just go back to this and talk a little bit about it rather than read to you the argument of the chapter, is that, the argument is translation is a really important material that disabled people rely on and that disabled artists use in their practice. And so what I'm suggesting is that, for example, image description, captions, alt text, all of that material is something that the contemporary disabled artists use as a way to point out either its lack or how it can be used in a more agential way by the artist. So oftentimes the artists say, well, when there is translation, sometimes it isn't sufficient. Like what would translation be if it was in the hands of the disabled person themselves? How can they have more creative control over those types of translations, right? So I really enjoy that. So it's on the one hand kind of commenting on its lack of, but then it's also commenting on its production and its frequency and its quality. But it's also saying that translation should be held up as a really important artwork in and of itself. So it shouldn't be considered inferior to the original. That it's also very important for museums to consider as maybe even more important in some ways. Okay, so it's really kind of trying to challenge the hierarchy of value of these things in a museum. So just giving you this example, this is like the first example in the book that I always found to be so fun and so humorous. And so what Carmen had done here, Carmen is a non-visual learner. Carmen is an artist who identifies as being blind and low vision. And so he relies on image description a great deal and asks friends and companions to describe images for him. And so in this particular artwork, he had asked some friends to describe very iconic masterpieces in art history, that being The Raft of the Medusa by Jericho, which is what the image is on the right-hand side. It's a really famous painting of men who are they're basically on this like raft who are in the middle of a very stormy, menacing ocean. And there's dark clouds, and some of the men look like they've fallen into the ocean and they're dead. So it's like a really intense scene. And then what Carmen had done is said, can you describe that to me and write out that description on a piece of paper to a friend? And so the friend did that. And then what the friend did was they passed it on to another friend. And then Carmen said, can you redraw the image based on the description without knowing the original piece, like without knowing that it was Jericho's Raft of the Medusa? And that's the product that you see on the left-hand side, is a reinterpretation of Raft of the Medusa based on an image description. So what's happening here is these like layers of interpretation and translation. And Carmen is trying to say, exactly the point I raised earlier, is that the two of them shouldn't be seen as one is better than the other necessarily, or one is superior than another, but simply just that there's like so many rich generative ways that we can be looking at artwork. And I found that I found it to be quite comical, the way that the image was, you know, uh, basically interpreted, right? So you have all of these men who are running around in speedos, some without, and then that person who actually did the piece is Canadian, so they included a Canadian flag in the scene. So it's like quite fun and quirky and witty. And this is another example on the screen here is um, Sandra Botticelli's very famous Birth of Venus with a beautiful white woman with long golden locks who's um, coming out of a big giant clamshell. And then there's, the wind is blowing and there are other, there's angels who are blowing on her and flowers. And it's a very beautiful, luscious scene. And then it was reinterpreted by someone else based on an image description. And it's like a very graphic illustration in black and white. And it looks almost like a cartoon drawing. So it's completely different interpretation. And then the background is cross hatching and just a really different way of looking at the image, which I really enjoy. So the next example, which is really something else to, something important to talk about, is Christine Sun Kim's work, who many of you might know. Christine, I've known Christine since 2012. Christine showed her work in her first ever exhibition with my show, What Can a Body Do, at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. And now Christine's having a huge solo show at the Whitney Museum opening in the spring. I wanted to promote that. I'm so proud of Christine and that the acclaim that she's managed to achieve. But her work is really, has been so inspirational and influential to my thinking around translation, because they really, in her drawings, she incorporates American Sign Language and tries to kind of visualize it. And they're very idiosyncratic interpretations of sign language, but also musical notation. And she incorporates text. And I feel as though her work has been greatly inspired by other artists who were thinking about the score, such as Lamont Young. This is like work drawings from the 1960s. So Christine has really, by doing all of this work, Christine is really trying to show what her relationship to sound is, which many people would presume is non-existent because Christine is deaf. So she's been trying to kind of advocate for the importance of sign language and translation and empowering herself in the process, trying to, on the one hand, like show audiences, this is that idea again, right? This tension between antagonism and then also on the other hand, like trying to educate audiences and have them be with Christine as a deaf person, but try and, have audiences understand the frustrations of translation and when there's a lack of that. This was an installation at PS1 in New York City back in this says 2013, it's 2014. But basically what happened is that people would have use these kind of devices, these blue radio transmitters, and they would have to walk around the gallery and like they would go up, they would trace these blue strings that were suspended on the ceiling, and the transmitter would basically be tracking along those blue strings as a way of hearing what was coming out of the transmitters. But it was really, really difficult to get sound. Most of the time, it would just be cackling noise. So it was really like this metaphor for the struggle that Christine herself experiences on a day-to-day basis with sound and with accessing sound and with accessing translation and interpretations of sound, etc. So what I'm going to do is, again, being conscious of time, jump ahead to the next chapter, which is called Sensory Aesthetics. I'll just give one quick example from this one, which this one here, which is my favorite. This is Carmen Papalia's work again. And Carmen, as I said, is a non-visual learner. And over the years, he's felt, very uneasy with his white cane as a mobility device. He feels like it's a marker that is sometimes construed in a negative way by the general public, and that he wanted to turn it into an art practice. He wanted to address that in his art practice and turn it into something else. Namely, in this example here on the screen, you see Carmen, who is walking with a high school orchestra. They have all different instruments in their hands. There's a trombone, there's clarinets, trumpets, and they're walking along a street. And basically, the high school orchestra is Carmen's guide for walking through public space. And they had a series, a repertoire of sounds that would guide him for turning left or right or going up and down stairs. Excuse me. All right, so there's a YouTube link here. I'm gonna have us just watch a few minutes of it because it's so wonderful. Okay, you guys, bear with me. It's gonna happen in just a second.
Kind of started as a joke. I was walking around with a friend in Portland, and I kind of said, wouldn't it be funny if I instead of a white cane were to walk around with a marching band.
I started out by telling them what performance art was and kind of getting them to know that, and then saying, and then explaining that we had this opportunity to perform in a performance art piece, and then I told them what the actual piece was going to be. And a lot of them were concerned that we might run him into the street or get hurt or something like that, but then they gradually became more and more excited about it.
He had asked me what are the obstacles and things that I often will encounter on a walk, and we kind of talked through those as maybe starting points for him to work with the band and have them kind of just figure out musically what would represent those obstacles.
One of the sounds is if he gets close to, let's say, an object and someone runs to that object and plays and trills, and so he can know that to not go through there. What does it sound like?
So for up, we're gonna play for a step up. We're gonna do the two notes in the B flat scale, where it's gonna go from the lower to the higher note. So it's gonna be dun dun, and we're just gonna go straight up. And then he'll know when to watch for a step up. A step down is gonna be it's gonna be the same thing, just in reverse. So it's gonna be dun dun.
I was a little afraid before the rehearsal yesterday, but I feel ready for today's performance, and I'm confident that the students and that I will be able to convey the signals for the obstacles and and also enjoy the art aspect of it too.
The only thing I hope is that we don't get him injured or possibly killed.
I guess we'll just go. I got rid of my cane and I have my marching band. We're just gonna walk and explore. So let's do it. I think this is also connected to like this larger issue for me with the white cane as a symbol. And I started using a white cane maybe 10 years ago. It's connected to an institution that has particular goals around identification and rehabilitation and independence, and I didn't really know how I felt about the institution that it was connected to, and I often felt like the white cane separated me from people instead of bringing me towards people.
Okay, I'm gonna jump out of that and go back to my presentation. So, over the years, Carmen has really been doing these incredible experiments like the one that you just saw. This one here on the screen is him giving a presentation doing the same mobility device at the High Line in New York. And so what you see on the screen is Carmen, who's wearing a red shirt and jeans and a hat. And behind him are different people who are playing different kinds of instruments again. And then in the foreground is an image of a man wearing a red shirt playing a saxophone. So he's really done all these magnificent experiments, challenging, I call it like a sensory aesthetics, because he's really kind of challenging, flipping back and forth between vision and sound, and also even smell. Just excuse me for a minute, I have to have some more water. I'm really struggling here. Hold on. Okay, thanks for your patience, everybody. So what I'm going to do is show a couple more examples of work, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Actually, it's kind of time for questions now. So what I want to do is just quickly say that this is the third chapter is on movement, and we kind of talked about that already through Corbin Walker's work, how to move through space that is challenging, or how it's challenging for disabled people to move through space, but how that disabled artists are trying to turn the tables and make it challenging for non-disabled people. The other chapter is all about tactility, and it's kind of talking about haptic activism, and it's advocating for audiences to be able to touch more things in art museums, that multisensoriality piece, because it's so important for us to gather more information and more knowledge about work. And then the last chapter is exhibition design, which is basically talking about, one of them is talking about Finnegan Shannon and how Finnegan's saying we need more benches, right? And how to change our wayfinding experience in the museum. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and apologizing for my cold again today. But also happy to say that if people want a copy of this presentation, I can send that to you as a PDF, because I know that, you know, this was just a really small glimpse of what the book has to offer. But hopefully it gives you like some insight into what is happening in this book. I do have, just give myself a plug for my second book. My second book is coming out in September of next year, and it's called Hospital Aesthetics, Disability Medicine Activism. And that one is kind of more talking about how disabled artists are very much also protesting the medical industrial complex. So stay tuned for that one as well, which I'm really excited about. I'm also working on a third book about disability and mental health justice. So there's a lot of activity. So thanks for your attention. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. This is Nicole Simpson here. So just a reminder for everyone, if you have a question or a comment, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read them out loud. And Amanda, I had a question for you. So you said you've been focusing on disability arts activism for 10 plus years now. Both within the field of art history and within museums, what changes have you seen, and what would you still like to see changed?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is just that there is a lot more art being made about disability. I mean, you know, 10 years ago when I was working with Carmen and Christine, there was like very little work being done. And not just that, but people were I mean, people were afraid to do work about it. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna have another drink of water. Yeah, so people were, you know, I just remember trying to curate shows, and artists were very reluctant to be in my shows because they said, I don't want to be in a show about disability, because it's very ghettoizing to be categorized in this way, and they felt like it was very limiting for their art practice, and they were afraid of like being I guess like, you know, ghettoized in this category forevermore, and they didn't want to be stuck in that category for their entire careers. And so that happened a lot, and now it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue because there's a whole new generation of artists that I've seen in, you know, in their 20s, for instance, who are not just making work about disability, but they're also, there's other disabled curators, and lots more scholarship happening. Just this year alone, that, you know, I've been looking at a lot of different conferences, art history conferences, and I noticed that there are calls for panels about disability art. So that's a big change. But yeah, I think that as far as the limitations, you know, some of the major museums have started to collect work by disabled artists, namely work by Christine Sun Kim and Park MacArthur and Carolyn Lazard, particularly. But I don't still see much of kind of what you've all done at the Zimmerli, which is like basically bringing in exhibitions about disability in the museum. So the Zimmerli is really breaking new ground, in my opinion, for that. And there's a big show right now at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego about disability, which is also a first. So just seeing more exhibitions about disability. Having said that, you know, there's this terrific, you know, Christine Sun Kim is doing this terrific survey at the Whitney Museum that I mentioned in the spring. There's going to be a show that's being organized at the Museum of Modern Art by, I believe his name is Mullen, who is a developmentally disabled artist from Richmond, California, from NIAD, National Institute for Artists with Disabilities. and that's a kind of a first that MoMA is organizing a show of an artist with an intellectual disability. So it's really exciting that suddenly there's these big shows that are happening. SF MoMA, you know, incorporated, like, I think they acquired over 100 works from Bay Area disabled artists earlier this spring. So there's more happening, there's more examples happening, but I think it's still not happening with the kind of frequency that is, you know, would be more equitable, I would say. So that's a good question.
Great, thank you so much. And we have some questions here from our attendees. From Florette. If you had to educate directors and curators of art spaces on the single most important element to consider when making spaces accessible, what would it be? And also adds feel better.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys, that I've been so like interrupting with, you know, coughing and what have you. Anyway, the single most important element to consider making spaces accessible, what would it be? Wow, that's a really good question, because I don't think it's one single thing. Because there's so many different disabilities. And I think it's, you know, and I kind of like I always say that it's hard to make spaces fully accessible because it's all about adaptation. So maybe that's the biggest thing, is to say that it's about being adaptable and about being flexible. And that, you know, you can try your best to make your spaces accommodating, but that it's kind of going to be challenging to meet the needs of every visitor. And I remember many times I've curated shows where I thought I was doing a really good job with access, and then suddenly a visitor would come in and say, well, you forgot this for my child, or you forgot to do this. And so, you know, then I think that it's the adaptability piece or the flexibility piece is when you say, actually, I can change that, and you could do that halfway through a show, and that's fine. So to kind of embrace being receptive to people who have different needs and different concerns.
Thank you, Amanda. And next from Maria, who says, great presentation, thank you. And to please share the PDF with attendees, which if we get it from you,
Yes.
Amanda, we can send it out to everyone. And Maria continues, particularly looking forward on work intersecting mental health and medical industry machine. So can you maybe speak a little bit more, Amanda, about the work you said you have upcoming on that?
Yeah, that's my third book that I'm working on, you know, thinking about mental health justice and how, you know, there's such a long history of outsider art and in art history, and just trying to sort of not necessarily challenge that, although I kind of do feel like that's a problematic category and it has been, but I'm interested in giving artists who have mental health issues or mental health challenges, mental health, who live with different kinds of mental health differences. I'm interested in trying to give them a voice and interested in articulating how they might be able to like best represent themselves, especially in the context of the asylum, which is kind of like this locus that has been, you know, problematic for many years, like in terms of violence and in terms of you know, how they've been outsider artists have been categorized in certain really problematic ways. So that's kind of what that book is trying to do. The one that's coming out in September is more thinking about artists who have various chronic conditions or immunocompromised conditions, and that really want to challenge the way that they've been treated, because again, their voices aren't being heard in a hospital setting. So this is really what is at the crux of my work, I think, is this just being really you know, feeling like giving agency and empowerment to all of these disabled folks who I'm in community with. It stems from my own experience, personal experience, my own lived experience as a person with a disability. And it's also just feeling like there's been a gap in art museums for a really long time since I was a young person visiting art museums and not seeing myself being represented on the walls, and how that can be changed.
Thank you. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you see more curators taking responsibility for advocating for disabled artists, or is the advocating sitting with the artists still?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's kind of what I, um, the part of sort of what I was talking about in the exhibition design piece, the chapter in the book, is that artists are doing the advocating, like Finnegan Shannon, for instance. So I think that there are more curators starting to take responsibility, but it's mostly the artists that are pushing for that and thinking about disabled audiences, especially. And so in my 5th chapter, I'm saying that museums need to pay attention to the artists, because the artists are not only making work about disability, but artists are making work for disabled audiences, so that they actually are giving us a template or some tools for how to design our spaces differently, to make it more comfortable and convenient for disabled audiences as well. So it's mostly the artists, I would say, to go back to that question.
Thank you, Amanda. And our next question from Jenny Julia. Thank you for writing about architectural interventions by disabled artists in exhibitions. Are there architects with disabilities specialized in exhibition architecture? Architects with disabilities often work in public sector, and it seems really rare to meet them in museums or the culture field. And congratulations on your book.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Before I answer that question, I just want to say that it's a pleasure to have Jenny Julia in the room with us, because for those of you who don't know, I hope Jenny Julia doesn't mind, but Jenny Julia's a Finnish artist who represented Finland at the Venice Biennale this year. So congratulations to you for being in that space. I got to see your work, and it's such a privilege to have you here with us today in this conversation. To answer your question, I will say that I don't think there are. The only person that comes to mind is David Gisson, who wrote The Architecture of Disability. And though, David has written this really important book, but he kind of talks about architectures in all kinds of places, but I know that he's been called on quite a lot by museums to come in and work with them on different projects. And so you'd have to call on David to get more information about that, because I'm not sort of too aware of all the details of what all he's doing. He's been so busy because his book has done really well. But I would say that it's not something that is developed quite as much yet. But I would really hope to see more of that. And I would suggest kind of what I answered for the other question is that it's disabled artists. And there's very few disabled architects out there who are leading the way in terms of thinking about, exhibition architectures.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please enter them in or comments, and we can share them with Amanda.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm really grateful to see the list of attendees, and some of you. Just wanted to say thank you to Florette for being here. Florette and I work closely together at the University of Houston. I want to thank Faye Ginsberg, who has been a big supporter of my work for many years. Thank you, Faye, for coming today. And to George, I already mentioned. Maria Jose Garcia Risqueno, thank you for coming. Sally Bickerton, and also Sean Vigil. So thank you to those individuals, especially for being here with me today.
Thank you, Amanda. And as mentioned before, it was truly all of us here at the Zimmerli, our honor and privilege to get to know you, to work on Smoke and Mirrors, to work with all the wonderful artists in the show. It has really been a transformative experience for all of us here. And we look forward to implementing accessibility throughout the museum as we move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. And I see there's a comment from somebody that said that they've seen more disabled curators working in mainstream galleries. So yeah, that's really encouraging, and happy to if you have names of people, let me know them. I know there are others out there like Ezra Benes. I'll give Ezra a call out. He's been doing really good work. Tarane Fazeli, Chella Man. These are a few other people. Jessica Cooley, of course, and Fox. There's been some great people out there. It'll be exciting to see if there are more out there as well.
The comment from Maria. Thank you so much, Amanda, for this enlightening talk. And I just bought your book right now, so thank you.
That's great. And then for folks who don't know that there was thanks to the Zimmerli and Teresa Watson, there's an excellent story that just came out on New Jersey PBS, State of the Arts. And it's a really great little 8-minute segment where they interviewed myself and Finnegan. So you can watch that right now. It's airing live, but there's also a YouTube link. Maybe we can put that in the chat so folks can go ahead and watch that as well, given that Finnegan is one of the featured artists in my book as well.
Very exciting to watch. And as we move into the final days of Smoke and Mirrors, if you're in the New Jersey area, please come and visit and experience it. It's a full multi-sensory experience. I will say it's been extraordinarily popular here at the museum, especially with our student population. So thank you again, Amanda, for creating such an exhibition that's resonated with so many people.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, and I see, thank you, Brandon. You just put the YouTube link to the State of the Art segment in the chat. So you can see it there. It will be re-airing on PBS stations in the tri-state area. So you can catch it there as well. You're welcome, Maria. Okay. So I know since you're not feeling so well today, Amanda, thank you again for participating. Despite that, maybe we might sort of wrap up a little bit early. If you have any other last minute questions, last call to put them in. I see Maura. Maura, did you have anything to say? Close us out.
I was just popping in just to say thank you so much, Amanda, for this incredibly enlightening talk. And I actually just pulled up the website to buy the book too. So very excited to read it from start to finish. And thanks for joining us for this and for everything you've done for the Zimmerli.
Sure.
Thanks.
It's been really such a highlight of my career. So thanks to all of you. And thanks for everyone for attending.